It is my greatest pleasure to welcome the first keynote speaker for today, Hafsa Qureshi. So first of all, welcome Hafsa to the International Bisexuality Research Conference 2022. A brief introduction. Hafsa is from Stonewall, the largest LGBT rights organization in Europe, and she will be speaking with us about her experiences of being bisexual, genderqueer, Muslim, disabled, and Indian, as well as the importance of visibility and awareness. Hafsa is an openly bi and genderqueer Muslim working to raise visibility and awareness for their community by talking about faith, sexuality, and disability. And they want to help destigmatize people's perceptions of queer people of faith, as well as working within content development as Stonewall. They are a trustee with Gendered Intelligence, a charity that exists to increase understanding of gender diversity and improve trans people's quality of life. So there is a lot of stuff that you do. Okay, so let's start, Hafsa, and with a very introductory question. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and the
Sure.
work?
So hello everyone, I'm Hafsa Qureshi. Any pronouns are fine. Or sort of visual description, I'm wearing like a yellow hijab head wrap thing, medium skin tone, femme presenting, I guess, today. Also, I literally just yesterday came out of the hospital, so hopefully I make sense today and I can be coherent. But if you're not quite getting what I'm trying to say, please just drop it in the chat or something and I'll try and be a bit more coherent. But yeah, basically I am a busybody who just wants to make sure that people like me are heard. I think, as Lucia has mentioned, like, I'm bisexual, but I'm also Muslim, and to some people in this chat that's going to not be that interesting. To other people, it'd be like, oh, that's so unusual. And my job basically is to point out how not unusual that is. My job is to point out how ordinary that is. And I want us to reach a point in society where I can say that I'm bi and no one bats an eyelid, because frankly, it's not that interesting. But unfortunately, we are not at that point yet where we have so many queer people of faith. I'm definitely not unique in that aspect at all. And yet there's a lacking of visibility, in part because there's so many people who share my identity who are at risk of harm or ostracization, or of much, much worse, really, for being completely out for who we are. I'm here because I am incredibly privileged. I have the capacity to talk about my identity without any fear of anyone taking away my home or walking away from me. Everyone in my life accepts me for who I am, which is not the norm. And I kind of got involved in this work because I was working as a civil servant, so sort of, I don't know what the equivalent, working for the government basically. And I joined an LGBT network at the time, and then they asked for people of color to get involved. And I just sort of, I'd never really been out at work. I'd kind of been out in my personal life, but I just never realized how important it was. So I thought, oh, well, I'll get involved, sure. And I started campaigning with them, and then all of a sudden, every single day, I'd get so many emails from other people saying, oh, I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm trans, like I'm Muslim too. I didn't know we were allowed to talk about this. And it was incredible, because I'd never realized that my identity could be useful to other people. I had no idea that it meant so much to so many other people to see themselves represented. And I kind of got involved with that work, and then I eventually started working with Stonewall, and then started working with Gendered Intelligence as a trustee, and it's kind of just gone on from there, really.
Thank you a lot for this kicking off of our conversation. And just as a reminder for anyone attending, if you want to drop a question in the chat or a comment, we are here, we read them. So please do, please feel free to ask whatever is on your mind. And again, thank you, Hafsa, for joining us, even if yesterday was an eventful day for you. So you're making perfect sense, by the way. Everything is okay. So another question that I wanted to ask you, this, I mean, it's in general the theme for the day. What does being bisexual mean to you?
Being bisexual means a lot of different things to me, and in and amongst that is like being genderqueer, being queer itself. I think it's, to me, it feels a lot more, I guess, political than just saying, you know, I like gender similar to mine or opposite kind of thing. It's, to me, it's less a definition of who I'm attracted to or who I'm not attracted to, and more a statement that being a South Asian person who's often read as female, and was like socialized as female and all that kind of stuff, um, throughout my life I have been expected to follow a very specific um, future. So for example, people in my culture, and not everyone, this is not applicable to everyone, but at least where I'm from, in Birmingham, in England, um, culturally and kind of not quite so much in the religion, but culturally, you're kind of expected to stay with your family, go to university, meet your future husband there, have a million children, and that's kind of it. That's your life in summation. And again, this is not for everyone, but that's kind of the culture I grew up in, of like, that's how you do things. And to me, being bisexual and openly bisexual was a rejection of that, of that kind of forced heteronormativity of saying, you know, this is how your life is going to pan out, because I've already thrown a spanner in the works, because I'm not just attracted to XYZ, you know. And but following that through and being here today, to me, is a political statement of no one needs to follow that life pattern that's drawn out for us, that was designed for cis people, for het people, for white people, because it is not applicable to everyone. If you choose to follow those steps and, you know, get married and have children or whatever, that should be your choice. And I think for me, it's a case of, I reject some aspects of that choice. Some of it I have embraced. I am married, but at the same time, I'm openly polyamorous as well. So it's, you know, it's, to me, it's, I want to queer every aspect of my life, because I don't want to follow a set plan that was laid out for me, because I reject that. But at the same time, it's jarring for some people, because I consider myself a religious person. It's like, well, you're following what you deem to be God's plan, right? So how does that fit into your kind of personal viewpoint? So I guess my job then is to kind of explain that and kind of help people understand that what I want to kind of purport is that everyone should be able to do exactly what they want, as long as it causes no harm to anyone else. If I want to follow a religion, I should be able to. If I want to color my hair, I should be able to. Conversely, if I don't want to do those things, I should absolutely be able to. So yeah, sorry if I went on a tangent, but yeah.
Not at all, not at all. I want to queer every aspect of my life is such a brilliant statement. I think many of us will follow you in this. May I ask you the story of how you realized that you were bisexual? We all have that story.
Sure, gosh. So when I was kind of growing up, I actually thought I was lesbian, because I was just like, I was very attracted to women, and I was just like, this seems like an important part of my identity. And I kind of just didn't really do anything with it. I think I remember saying it to my sister on like National Coming Out Day, and then she was just kind of like, I think she just sort of assumed I'd grow out of it. And then as I got older, I started working and all that kind of stuff. I kind of skipped the step where people go to university, because I just started working as soon as I was kind of able to. And yeah, I remember I was working a job I really did not like. I worked somewhere where basically uh, my manager wouldn't call me by my name. She would just call me the girl. It was incredibly demeaning. I was quite depressed, and then I started joining. There's like a local tabletop role playing group, and I was like, oh, I've always been interested in this. Think like Dungeons and Dragons type of thing. Although I prefer like Vampire and Changeling for those who play those. I joined a local group, and then I met some people, and then some people there were men, and I was like, oh, I'm attracted to this person, and that was really strange to me, because I was like, I didn't expect this. That's so odd. And then I ended up in my first relationship. Again, I did not expect that whatsoever, and I think it was kind of an opposite learning for me, of like, I never thought I'd be with a man. I'd never in my life. I also at that point hadn't really thought about being with anyone. I had so much stuff going on in my life, it just never really popped up into my head. And then yeah, I kind of had this realization of like, oh, I guess it doesn't really matter. The gender of the person I'm interested in is kind of irrelevant to me. And it wasn't like this sort of massive watershed moment. It was just like, I'm just into the person. It doesn't really affect me. And some people call that pansexual, some people omnisexual, other people have different terminologies. I prefer to use bisexual because of the bi erasure in this community and just the stigmatization of what bi means. Like, for example, some people assume that being bi means you must be transphobic, which of course is not true. And, you know, I think I'll be preaching to the choir anyway today, but, you know, I just kind of want to challenge those assumptions.
Thank you. You have already touched upon this a bit, but can you tell us more about how your other identities affect your experience as a bi person?
Oh, so it affects it massively because in LGBTQ plus communities, people do not like me. They do not like me being there. They don't like my presence. It makes people deeply uncomfortable because they expect that I am there for a specific reason. There's this assumption that I'm there to accost. And this has happened time and time again in Birmingham, in London, in kind of everywhere. I'm always assumed to be an ally wherever I go. But I'm always assumed to be an antagonistic ally, which those two assumptions are not true. And it can be very, very difficult to sit there and be like, no, I am bi, I am queer, I deserve to be here as well. Like, I'm not sitting here judging you for anything you've decided to do. And yet you're showing me this judgment, you're showing me this aggression for my identity. And I've reached a point where, I mean, there were so many times people told me I needed to take my hijab off, or, you know, basically be less Muslim, quote unquote, so I'm doing air quotes, in order to be accepted. And that was never something I wanted to do, because to me, being Muslim is just as important. It's a key component of who I am and how I live my life. There was never a question of I need to give this up. But at the same time, I am bisexual. That's not something I can rescind from my identity or from myself. Sorry, I've got a cat visitor. You might see a little cat pop in. This is Kirby. We adopted him recently. I'll turn the blurring off if I can. But yeah, see him there. And being Muslim, it can be difficult when I enter kind of my cultural community, because I live a life that's quite different to other people in my community. I remember when I first moved out of my family home, that's not something culturally that women tend to do. It's not something that's really accepted, because it's kind of assumed you spend your life like living with your family, you do this, you do that. And when I kind of attend events for Muslims, things tend to be separated by gender, and it's already difficult as a genderqueer person, because I'm like, I don't think gender should be binary, frankly. But I remember attending an event. I used to take classes about, because I love the study of religion, I love learning about my religion. So I went to a class to kind of learn more about a specific subject. And I remember they separated us into men and women's sides, as they often do. And the women's side had no aircon, had no projection so we could even see what was happening. And we had no paperwork. Like, we were supposed to be working off like study material. So someone managed to call someone and say, oh, hey, we need the material and whatever. So a man appeared with a box, shoved it towards our door, and then ran off. And I remember thinking, wow, this is what it's like now. This is going to be my life. If I ever want to pursue more in this field, I'm going to sit there while someone shoves a box and disappears. And it's kind of jarring to be in that environment where it's like, I want to sit here as a religious person and learn, but at the same time, my gender is so relevant. It doesn't need to be. My sexuality has to remain hidden here, because I'm going to upset some people. So I mean, being bi and being Muslim, there's always a space I'm not going to be welcome. Every single event I have ever been to that's LGBTQ plus, someone has come up to me and asked me why I'm there. At Black Pride, at Bi Pride, at I guess quote unquote regular Pride, pretty much every single event. The only times I haven't been is if I know the people there, where it's like a local event, but even then people will still ask me why I'm there. If I'm like, they'll definitely ask a question of like, oh, and you're ... as if waiting for me to fill in the blanks to explain, oh no, I'm bi. And I did used to start conversations by saying, oh, I'm Hafsa, I work at Stonewall, blah, 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 blah. Sorry if I'm talking a bit fast, but I kind of explained my reason for being there, until a friend of mine kind of turned to me and was like, why are you doing that? Like, you know, and I'd been so coached into that, explaining, no, I'm not like that. Don't think I'm homophobic, haha. Like, and I had to stop, because I was thinking, I am perpetuating this myth that people who look like me must be homophobic. I need to stop. I do not need to explain why I'm here. I am here because I'm queer, but also I don't owe anyone an explanation. What if I was questioning, what if I wasn't quite sure? What if I was an ally? I don't need to sit there and explain myself to anyone. And that has been kind of a process for me to think, I don't want to upset anyone. I don't want to encroach on anyone's, personal beliefs or what have you. But frankly, if other people can be accepted wholeheartedly for who they are, I should be as well.
Thank you, Hafsa. So we have a question in the chat, and since it's around these topics that we are touching upon now, and then we will move on to other stuff, I'm going to read it to you. Is by Justine Picot. I hope I pronounced that right. So Hafsa, hi, and thank you for sharing. How do you manage to reject this pattern that you are expected to follow, live with your family, go to university, meet your husband, have a million of children, as you said, and to live your truth as a bisexual?
I think this is going to sound really strange, but I think I lucked out because the decision was kind of made for me. So growing up, my people in my life were quite ill, and eventually I ended up where some family members passed away, and kind of all the focus was kind of put on kind of earning money, paying the bills, and kind of getting by and getting by. And that was kind of the main focus, because no one really had the capacity for anything else. I'd been a young carer for like some point of like when I was a young adult to a teenager. That was always my focus. And then when the people I was caring for passed away, it was suddenly like, what do I do with my life now? I suddenly had to consider my own life and my own existence, which I hadn't done for probably a decade at that point. So I suddenly had to kind of explore who I was, and it suddenly became relevant. It was like, oh, I think I might be bisexual, and that kind of got put away somewhere, because it's like, well, I'm caring for someone, that's kind of pointless right now. And then all of a sudden it was like, I have to consider these things. At some point I need to live my life for me. And it was in that moment that I was just kind of like, these are things that are important to me. I want to live my life differently. I have been given an opportunity now to completely start over. Like, I've lived my life in a very specific way for other people because they needed me. And no one needs me right now. I need me. I need to kind of figure out what I want and why I'm here. Because I don't know if anyone here has been a carer or anything like that, but when you've been caring for someone for so long and then, they pass away, it's kind of like you lose your meaning for existence for a while. And that is a little bit toxic, because obviously you should be there for yourself. But I kind of had to do a lot of learning about what I wanted. It was like, because you'd spent so long ignoring your own needs because you think it's kind of selfish, because you're like, well, this person needs me more, I need to think about that later. And then you have to kind of stop and think, no, I need to find out why I'm here. I need to think about what I need now. And then it was kind of getting to know people and getting more involved with the LGBTQ plus scene, that I was again met with people assuming I'd live my life specific ways. Even when I was still a carer, people would assume I'd go to university, I'd meet someone, I'd have children. And I didn't want to do any of those things because I couldn't afford to go to university. I didn't have time to go to university. I was working constantly to pay my mortgage, to pay my bills. And like, I'd never wanted children because, again, I didn't have time. I didn't want children. So in my mind, there was always this thought of, I don't want to do those things because I've devoted my life to these people. I've devoted my life to this. And I think throughout that, when things shifted, it was a case of, well, what do I want? Let's go back to those things. What do I actually want? And that's been a very long process to kind of stop feeling selfish for wanting certain things, for deviating away from that life plan. Because there's still people in my life who knew me as a child and they're like, but you were so different, you were so this, that. And in their mind, I've destroyed my life because I've deviated so vastly from the plan that was kind of decided for me. And yet I feel like I've paid my dues in a way. I've put my time in from since I was a child to focus on other people. Putting aside my own emotional needs from, a very young age is not healthy. And I did that for years and years and years. So frankly, if those people think I should change my life for their sake, I've paid my dues. I've done all of that for years and years and years. It's time for me now. I realize that may be irrelevant to a lot of other people who are not in that very niche situation that I was, but at the same time, I posit that, as long as you're not at risk of harm, if you're not at risk of ostracization or even violence or any of those other horrible things, if someone claims that they love you, why do they only love part of you? And that's always what got to me. It was like, well, these people have grown up with me. They've seen me struggle. They've seen me care for others. And never did they step in and say, you're struggling, let me help you. They just stood there and watched and judged and were unhappy with how I did certain things. You know, I remember at funerals where people, you know, people were judging me for how much I cried or how little I cried because that deemed how much I cared. And it, to this day, upsets me because you have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what this has felt like. You've just sat there and judged. And throughout in the queer community, there's so many other people, some people who have had it a little bit easier and maybe haven't had to struggle as much, and some people have struggled just as much as I have. Regardless of that, I think every single person should be allowed to live as they are, for who they are. You know, I don't want this to seem like some kind of competition of like, oh, I've suffered and therefore I've earned the right. Absolutely not. No one should have to suffer to be who they are. But at the same time, I hope this kind of helps explain that, you know, you don't owe anyone an explanation. You know, regardless of what your religious or spiritual beliefs are, you know, you have this life. What are you going to do with it? And like, sorry, this is such a long answer, but also conversely within that, as a Muslim, I consider myself, I like to look after my community. We call ourselves the Ummah, like the community. And I always think to myself, if we're here to serve our community, that includes queer Muslims. That includes everyone who isn't, that some people in society deem unworthy. And like, that always gets to me of like, why have we created a line around people we think we're better than? Why do some people think they're better than homeless people, or think they're better than sex workers, or think they're better than XYZ group? What made you more special? What made you better, quote unquote? So, I mean, just keeping that in mind of, you know, you, this morality police thinking that they're better than certain people is just wrong, in my opinion. Sorry, that's such a long answer.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Hafsa. I'm seeing a lot of messages saying how inspiring your journey is, and I second that. So there are a lot of, like, there are popping up questions in the chat around faith. So let me ask you one myself. I'm using my hosting privileges and then run to them, because you are mentioning a lot this passion that you have to join forces and raise awareness around queer people and people of faith. So I mean, you have already said a lot, but can you tell us more about why this is so important to you? What is the most important aspect to join those two sides of your identity together in your work?
I think the important aspect is because I've met so many other queer Muslims, and I just want to make sure that they understand that they are welcome and that they are loved, because like I said, I'm incredibly privileged. I live in a very special bubble where everyone in my life is so welcoming and accepting and loving. And that really isn't the norm. And I think everyone deserves to have that community, whether it's in person or online or somewhere, where they know that they aren't a freak, they're not a weirdo, you know, they're one of many, you know. And I think I shouldn't have to do that, because this should be common knowledge. There's so many different types of queer people of faith or other queer people, bi people within the community, that it should be, you know, a kind of no-brainer. Of course there are people who are bi who share other identities, of course there are. And yet we're still having this conversation where, when I put myself forward, even as someone who works for an LGBTQ plus charity, who's a trustee of a trans-led charity, I'm still having to justify, no, I am a Muslim, yes, I am bi. Like, I'm still reaching hurdles where people do not understand why I hold these identities, and they expect me to drop one or argue with me about how they can't coexist. I remember giving a talk about how you shouldn't have to choose between faith and sexuality. And right at the end, someone asked, okay, yeah, but if you had to choose, and kept insisting, okay, but if you had to choose. And that was after I'd already given a talk about it. And it's exhausting. No one should have to constantly explain who they are and why they're here. And the reason I kind of want to put myself forward is not because I think I'm important and that I need to be the voice behind this, but because of my massive, massive privilege, I am able to step forward and be more visible than other queer Muslims can. And I want to use that I want to use that privilege to elevate the voices of others. You know, there's so many queer Muslims I know that are fantastic people that can't be this out, because it will risk, you know, their life, their livelihood, other aspects of their life. So, you know, with their permission, with their, you know, with their knowledge. I want to put forward their ideas and share my own, and make sure that our voices are heard, because I mean, I'm really not unusual. There's so many queer Muslims, so many bi Muslims, so many people raised as Muslim who don't follow the religion but are still bi people, who are still, share so many aspects of our culture and our religion. We got another cat again. They deserve the right to have their voices heard without risking their livelihoods. And sometimes a discourse around faith, religion, sexuality is held by other people who don't share my identity, and the way they talk about things is I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this. The way they talk about my community is wrong sometimes. I know that seems quite drastic, but people make assumptions about my community. They make assumptions about people. They don't speak my language. They don't speak our language. They lose so much context, and that bothers me so much. And I think people from our community should speak for our community. So that's something also that's quite important to me. Hello, Kirby sleeping. Hello.
Thank you. And hello, Kirby. Welcome to this very bi plus space.
He's an ally.
So we have a question from Sean in the chat about basically what you were discussing now. So he's asking, do you think attitudes toward religious affiliation are changing in LGBTQ spaces? Queer people of faith seem more visible today than in previous decades.
I don't think it is changing fast enough, which sounds a bit harsh, but I mean, even in my very, very welcoming circles, I was at a talk where someone was talking about like legal aspects of like the Equality Act and the state of the law in the UK for LGBTQ plus people. And I remember asking a question about, oh, how's the Equality Act? Sorry, I should explain. In the UK, we have the Equality Act where there are protected characteristics like age, race, sex, not gender, unfortunately, but sex, pregnancy status, stuff like that, that are protected by law. My question was, what about people who put forth that they are religious and therefore unaccepting of LGBTQ plus people? And I was kind of asking them to clarify legally, how can we kind of work that into our position of like, you can't really put one thing above another. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. And their response was to tell me about how religion is bad, and oh, I bet in your religion people tell you they want to push you off like tall buildings and such. This was a professional context. This had nothing to do with my question. And yeah, I still have to deal with that time and time again. Attitudes are changing in that we are more visible, but attitudes are not changing in that people are still responding this way. And I remember in that moment, I kind of just ignored it. And then afterwards, other people in the call were like, are you okay? Do you want me to say something? What's happened? Like they messaged me during the call. I just didn't even notice. And it kind of hit me like, oh, I wasn't overreacting. I'm so used to people talking to me this way that I just thought, oh, I'm just being too sensitive right now. And that is not okay. I mean, lots of people saying, oh, that's horrific. Yes, absolutely. Like in hindsight, I'm like, they should not have spoken to me that way. That's not acceptable. And yet in that moment, I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm kind of used to this. So in some ways it's changed in that you'll hear more from people like me, but it's not changed enough because people are still talking to me this way. And this is, I mean, not to be that person that thinks I'm important, but I do work for a very queer charity. I'm in this bubble of LGBTQ plus knowledge and experience, and I'm still spoken to this way. And I'm in a very unusual circumstance, and people still treat me like my opinion is less than. So I think it's not changing fast enough. And I think visibility is a key part of that, sorry, where we need more people like me, but we also need a lot of people not like me who share my identity, who don't share the same privileges I do, sharing their experience. But obviously doing so means putting themselves at risk. So again, we're asking more bi people of faith to put themselves forward at risk of their own well-being. So it's a difficult thing, and yeah, it's just not moving quite fast enough for me.
Thank you. So we have another question from Apolline. They're thanking you for your intervention and how inspiring it is that you mentioned that you do not have to explain why you are here. We're in an LGBTQA plus space. And they ask, so they are part of an LGBTQA plus organization in Belgium. where they deconstruct biphobia in secondary schools. When talking about religion, very often kids tell me that I cannot be Muslim and bi at the same time. What would you answer them? They are usually around 13, 14, 15 years old.
So I kind of go into this from a more religious perspective. So forgive me if this is a bit like isolationist the way I talk about this, but so in Islam we talk about something called jihad, which is a word that scares people who aren't familiar with it. It means struggle. There is greater jihad, lesser jihad. Lesser jihad is the war. Let's not get into that. But greater jihad is the struggle of an individual trying to balance who they are with this world, with temptation, with sin, with community, with all these different things. So to them, I'll kind of say, well, this is my jihad, this is my struggle, whether you understand it or not. My struggle is to fit into this world that doesn't accept me. So if they say, how can you be Muslim and bi? I would suggest not sitting there arguing, well, I can be because XYZ, because some people will not listen to you. Some people will sit there and argue with you, and they will try and find a way to point out that your existence is invalid. I strongly urge you not to argue with those people, or even young people who maybe have been told X is wrong, Y is wrong. Children have a very black and white way of thinking until they kind of grow up a bit more. And I'm not saying ignore them completely, but I'd instead put the question back to them and say, well, why can't I be? But at the same time explaining, well, this is how I was made, this is my struggle. And not necessarily justifying who you are or why you're the way you are, because they will sit back and think, well, that's just you. You have a unique circumstance, or you're not Muslim enough, quote unquote. And they'll kind of fob you off as just another Muslim or just another person who's not Muslim enough. But I didn't instead ask them, well, you know, God made us so many different ways. Why can't someone like me exist? So I guess I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Hafsa. So I would say that maybe we move to another side of your many activities, because you're doing quite a lot. So about Stonewall and your work there. So for those that are not very familiar with Stonewall, can you tell us a bit more about what it is as an organization and what is your job there?
Yeah, sure. So I got a cat looking at me. So Stonewall is Europe's largest LGBTQ plus charity, and we were founded off the basis of Section 28 in the UK. Section 28 was a law that was prohibiting the, as it was phrased, the promotion of homosexuality in schools, is how it was phrased. So basically, no one in schools could talk about LGBTQ plus people, identities, or anything like that. It was considered harmful to children. And a bunch of people got together and decided that was unacceptable and founded Stonewall and founded other organizations who got massively involved in campaigning against Section 28. And it was quite the fight. There's even a story of a bunch of fabulous lesbians who parachuted into the House of, was it House of Commons or House of Lords, to protest this. And so many people came together saying this is unacceptable. And from there, Stonewall continued on to fight against different things and campaign against things that exclude LGBTQ plus people. And to this day, we continue campaigning in different areas, things like sport, workplace issues, the law, working with the government, different aspects. And we do a lot in that, like Stonewall's quite large in what we do. And the reason we're called Stonewall, actually, and I've heard differing stories, but the one I've heard is, I've also heard interrupted BBC TV news. Yes, some queer people interrupted BBC. I forgot what I was saying, sorry. Yeah, so we, the reason we're called Stonewall is because when we were doing our accounting, we needed to call ourselves something, but we wanted something that people who understood who we were would know who we were, and people who didn't wouldn't bat an eye about it. And Stonewall is called, like the word Stonewall comes from the Stonewall riots some time ago, kind of where people were again fighting against LGBTQ plus phobia. And yeah, what I do at Stonewall is I work within the kind of content development and research team. I just yesterday my resource came out, which is I'm so excited about. It's called by your side. It's about bi inclusion within the workplace. So I work within the workplace team to kind of help organizations in doing LGBTQ plus inclusion work, and the resource is bi specific. I'm also co-chair of our bi network, and I wanted to make sure that the bi resource was for bi people, but also for people who don't know where to begin and kind of how to get started with bi inclusion. And I was very keen to get in discussions of bi misogyny and different kind of aspects of exclusion specifically towards bi people. So my job is to kind of research, and I definitely quoted, read a lot of Shuri Eisner's work, so I'm very excited for the piece later. But yeah, that's what I do at Stonewall, and I just kind of love it there. So everyone is really accepting and kind, and it's a really nice place to work.
Thank you. So you just mentioned this resource on bi research. So can you tell us a bit more about why you're so passionate about bi research, about spreading the bi research?
Yeah, absolutely. It's frankly because there isn't enough. A lot of research has been done on LGBTQ plus communities, like wider communities. A lot of work has been done for gay communities. I'm sure Shiri will talk about like the whole GGG problem of like so much focus on gay couples and gay community, and some focus towards LG, lesbian, gay communities, but bi communities get lost within that, trans communities get lost within that. There's still this normative, heteronormative perspective that we want the same things that cishet people want. And amongst that, people like bi folk and the bi community get completely lost. And the research that's done within LGBTQ plus communities is not specific to bi people or trans people. And when we look at research we do have, it shows us that bi communities are suffering, we are struggling. Stonewall's bi report that I helped present was released, I want to say 2020, but you can find it on our website if you just search Stonewall bi report, and it's quite depressing. It's a very depressing read. I won't go into specifics, but I was not surprised to see that our mental health and well-being was lower than lesbian and gay people, because our issues that are specific to us as a community, as bi people, aren't talked about enough, aren't researched enough. And I don't blame any specific person for that, because I think even researchers would probably struggle to justify why bi communities need this research, because you're probably speaking this to people who aren't bi, who aren't from a community. There's this assumption that bi people have a massive privilege, that people assume that we are straight and therefore we don't have any struggles. And then when we do have research that kind of goes against that, it's kind of brushed under the rug of like, well, there's other issues going on, we still need to campaign for other things, and bi people kind of get pushed to the wayside. I kind of call it like, I think the way biphobia is treated is as homophobia's like lesser cousin, like not that serious, not that big of a deal. And that obviously isn't the case, seeing the research we do have on mental health and well-being of bi people. And I just frankly wish there was more of it, because we just need more. We need more data that backs up what we already know as bi people, that our community is suffering. Our community is often completely overlooked, and that we are just as important as other aspects of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, thank you for all of this and for all your work. I think Ellen popped the link to the report in the chat, so it's there. And so we have a couple of questions in the chat. Let me pick that. It's kind of long, so I'm trying to sum it up very quickly. It's about bivisibility, particularly. So CK, they're asking, what should we do to be visible as bi? Because they're saying that recently they have seen ace flags or gay flags, so there is a general array of rainbows, but apparently bi visibility or even the bi colors are not quite as there as the others. And so what can we do, or what we should do to be visible as bi people?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, your safety comes first. So if it's not safe for you to be out, there is no harm or shame in not being completely out. Your safety is the most important thing. But if you feel comfortable and you're not at risk for being completely out or being out in other aspects like work or elsewhere, get involved, whether you're at school or at work or specific places. Sorry, if your workplace has an LGBTQ plus network, join up and tell them that they need to care about bi issues. I mean, what I love to do is look at workplace policies, because I know this is so boring, but a lot of them will talk about inclusion work and policies or kind of code of conduct at workplaces. Within that will be something about equality and diversity, usually, and it'll be quite vague. I like to take that vague statement and then start annoying people about it, of like, but this is part of our workplace duty. You know, we've got this little thing that says we need to be equal and stuff at work. You know, I'm bi, I feel that I'm not being heard at work. I want to do something about this. Basically, you kind of need to be a bit of a busybody, because people will not care until you make a bit of a fuss. So again, as long as it's safe for you and you're willing to do this work and it's not going to drain you emotionally, because it can be quite draining, is to kind of get in people's faces. There's someone who is doing this work, hopefully, where you are. And if not, you can be that person. People sometimes think, oh, you need a degree to do this work, you need a specific job title. You just need to be really annoying and kind of get in people's faces. Because I remember one workplace, we did have an equality and diversity officer who kind of just did nothing. I remember inviting him to a network meeting and he showed up an hour late and missed everything. That was great. I remember he sent me an email saying good job because I was on the intranet page, and like didn't respond when I was asking for like support in other aspects, like with the network or with other different things. So I just went completely over his head and just ignored that he existed and decided to actually get things done. So I always look at the hierarchy. If this person is not helping me, I'm going to jump above them and talk to that person. And I was a very, very junior employee. I was the lowest employee at the workplace. But because I put myself forward with so much confidence, they all assumed I was at the same level they were. They would talk to me as if I was a manager because they assumed I was. And I went with it. I never corrected them and said, no, actually, I make like a quarter of what you do. So I'd say a lot of it is bravado. A lot of it's confidence. A lot of it is sending an email and knowing that what you have to say is vitally important. Your lived experience is just as important as anyone sitting there with some degree. You know, what you have to say matters, and you definitely, if you are comfortable, should use your lived experience to say, well, this is what it's like for me. You might work for a place or be at school somewhere where they'll say everyone is equal, and yet you might know as junior employees or maybe at a lower level than, you know, higher management, you are not equal. You're not feeling equal at work. You're not feeling equal at school or wherever you are. You're not seeing bi representation. If you're not seeing enough bi flags, time to pull out the bi flags and put them everywhere. I always find it's easier to, what's that expression? It's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. You know, as long as you're not harming anyone, is anyone going to stop you from putting bi flags everywhere? I mean, you know, just putting that out there. Bit of anarchy.
There is a lot of cheers about being more annoying in the chat. So a big wave of being annoying. So we have a new motto, and also an anarchy it is. So
Yes.
okay, so yeah, I mean, I had a lot of questions, but I mean, I also encourage people from the audience to just put their questions there if they want to ask you something, because we are running out of time. So just another question about your work, because you said that you are a trustee at Gendered Intelligence. So can you maybe tell us more about that role and what your work there?
Yeah, of course. So gender intelligence are fantastic. If anyone needs any information about trans inclusion or just wants to see what's going on, gendered intelligence are amazing. I'm a trustee, so that means when internal decisions are made, I'm on a board with other people and we kind of discuss decisions that are being made. We support the organization, but I'm nowhere near the level of like actual employees at gendered intelligence. Like I really value the work that I do and I'm so proud to be part of gendered intelligence. But yeah, they are a fantastic organization. They do training, they're just wonderful, and everyone who works there is so wonderful, like everyone I've been able to speak to. But yeah, I just help kind of help them make kind of higher level decisions. I'm located in Birmingham in England for people asking, and Stonewall is based in London in England. But yeah, I'm in Birmingham. But yeah, GI are fantastic, and yeah, they genuinely care about everyone. And I know people say that about many workplaces, but the level of care and like the things that we've been discussing as a workplace have always been around how do we support people more, and just that is so wonderful to see. So I mean, definitely check out Gender Intelligence; they're fantastic.
Thank you. And we have the link for Gender Intelligence in the chat, so you can also browse that. We have a question. Okay, so from Jay, I wonder if you ever feel like your voice as a queer Muslim person has less weight because of your specifically bisexual identity.
Sorry, people do want to give my voice less weight, but again, this is where I become very annoying. People will speak over you, people will talk about your identity as if it doesn't exist. What I like to purport is that you do exist, many people like you do exist. When you're in conversation with people, they either want to hear what you have to say or they don't. And if someone is arguing against my identity, I'm not going to sit there and argue with them. I'm either going to remain completely silent or I'm just going to walk away if it's feasible, because that person is not there to have a constructive conversation. People can disagree with me about how I live my life, but if they're arguing against my existence, I will not engage in discussions with that person. And I strongly encourage other people to do the same. Your job is not to justify why you exist, because you do exist. So I think sorry, what was the question again? I've gone off on one again.
So the question was, if you feel like your voice as a queer Muslim person has less weight because of your specific sexual identity.
So people will assume that I am less religious because I'm bi, or they'll assume I know less about LGBTQ plus communities because I am Muslim. But again, that assumption is useless to me because what I have to say is relevant. Anyone with lived experience has something to say, and that experience is just as relevant. I've had people talk over me because I don't have a degree, or talked over me because I don't have like a specific qualification in XYZ area. I've been on panels with so many wonderful people who have excellent lived experience who tell me they don't think they should be there because they don't have a degree in this or they haven't done much public speaking. And I kind of just sit there like, no, you deserve to be here. So I think I'd strongly encourage, and the best advice I ever got was, if someone makes you feel like you shouldn't be there, walk into a room like a cishet white man, like you deserve to be there. Like the world was made for you because it should be.
That's such a great advice. So I have one last question, and maybe we leave like a couple of minutes more for the audience, but this is the big concluding question. So if you had any advice for other bisexual people, what would you say to them?
This is going to sound so cheesy, but your existence is activism. I know everyone says that and everyone's like, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And whilst it's important to get involved with this kind of work, sometimes the smallest thing you can do is just be bi wherever you are, and people will know that, oh, yeah, that's Bob who's bi at work. You don't have to necessarily paint yourself in rainbows or paint yourself in the bi flag and go do things. Your lived experience is just as valuable, just as important. And if you do want to get involved, then talk about your life, talk about your experiences, talk about how you felt that you don't get to be in certain spaces because of your bi identity and how harmful that can be. And also, you know, sometimes it's not your responsibility. I know this sounds weird coming from me sitting here talking to you about this, but we feel so much pressure to love and support and be vocal for our communities that it can be emotionally exhausting. So definitely pace yourself and think, yes, this is something that's important to me and I know it's important, but at the same time, is it going to support my well-being? Am I going to feel comfortable? So the cat has decided to, yeah, thanks for your tail. You know, your well-being comes first, your safety comes first. Keep all of those things in mind and think, it's not that you don't have the energy to do this fight. Your fight is your existence. You can keep going as you are for who you are. So sit and think about like how you can accost other people and get them involved in this work. Call on your allies to support you in this work. If there are people who are saying, you know, I'm an anti-racist, I want to support people of color. Cool, what are you doing to support me? You want to support LGBTQ plus people? Cool, what are you doing to support bi people? Call people on their abilities to do things and get them involved. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, more than one answer, actually. There is a lot to do there. Okay, so are there any more questions from the audience or the chat? I don't know if I can see them all. Hopefully. Okay, so I'll give everybody the last moment to think of a question for you. Just saying that we will meet again for another keynote moment later on in the day with Shiri Eisner and Christian Klesse about bisexuality and the future. So so it's not, I mean, you will stay with us for another I mean, wonderful conversation. So yeah, I don't see any more questions, and so I think we can wrap it up and let you rest for a bit. Thank you so much. This was such a wonderful, wonderful keynote. I think I'm speaking for everyone. Just, you know, I'm very amazed and in awe by all of what you're doing, and you also have a very nice cat. So, you know, you are kind of the perfect person.
Well, thank you
Okay.
for having me.
Thank you so much, Hafsa, and see you just in, I think, 1 hour.
Yep. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.